for coming out to do this for us. This is sort of, we're getting to the tail end of our ABCs of Oconee series, so we're getting into the really interesting letters pretty soon.
Hard one, so.
Yes, so this is U is for underwater. We're getting to V, but W is scheduled. W is for waterfalls, big surprise. And we have the Thomas King, he's the author of one of the local waterfall guides. He'll be coming out on November 14th to talk about most of those. It'd be impossible to talk about all of them, but we're looking forward to that. We'll give you some more information. We have lots of books in our gift shop about the lakes, what was there before the lakes. So these are on the back table when I put them back there in a second, about Keowee and Jocassee. We need a book on Hartwell if anyone wants to write one. That would be helpful. But like I said, we'll be back to Bill. He's our local dive expert from Jocassee Dive Shop, and he's going to tell us a lot about what he's experienced under the water. So give it up for Bill.
My name's Bill Routh. For the most part, I tell everyone I did grow up in Walhalla. I spent the first 12 years of my life as an Air Force brat running around the country with my father and my mother. But when my father retired, this is where we landed. And so from the time I was in the 6th grade until today, this is my community. And even previous to that, we would camp and fish on the Chautauqua River from 1964 to 1969. Before I even lived here, I spent my summer months camping on the river. My father's favorite pastime was fly fishing. So I grew up around the water, and it just became my inherent, I guess it shaped me. I was a lifeguard at the Walhalla City Pool, taught swimming lessons with my sister locally. So it is something that I've been doing most of my teenage and adult life. Diving was always something that intrigued me. It was always the coolest thing to watch the latest, what's coming out with Jacques Cousteau in one of his documentaries. And it was always something that I always looked forward to, was always intrigued by it. When I had my first opportunity to go scuba diving, my father said, oh, no, that's unsafe, you can't do that. So I missed that opportunity while I was a lifeguard at the Walhalla City Pool. The next opportunity I got, I was an adult, I didn't miss that opportunity. So I got a bunch of dive gear and learned how to scuba dive. That was in 1983. So I began my diving career just enjoying what was underneath the lakes. The more I dove and the more I learned about the lakes and how they were put in here and all of the items and structures that were lost because of the flooding of these valleys, Keowee River, the Toxaway, Horse Pasture, Whitewater River, all of these rivers and all of the communities, the houses, the farms, and everything that were around there, I mean, all of that's gone. And you can learn a lot about it in South Carolina history. Bill Whitmire was one of my teachers going through middle school here in Walhalla, and I remember how much he made that alive. He made it something that was real. It wasn't just something in a history book. So I got hooked on the history of this area, and that was probably the beginning of it. The more I got to advance skills of diving and being able to go deeper and stay longer and leave the recreational side of diving and go into what we consider a technical background of diving, the more intrigued I became by what was covered up by these lakes, what was left, what does it look like now? You know, what did it look like when it was above water? What does it look like now? So comparison photos, I've got several here I wanted to share with you. This is the front entrance of the Camp Jocassee. This girls' camp operated for about 40 years in Jocassee Valley. It catered mostly to young ladies from Florida. And the girls' camp would actually bring a train car from Florida loaded with campers all the way to Seneca. They would come by train and they would pick them up with all of their suitcases and their trunks and their luggage, and they would drive them from Seneca up to the girls' camp for their summer sessions. So that's how the girls, most of the girls got to the camp was by train. They were brought in from Florida. That was the market that was providing most of their campers, not all of them. I've met several ladies that were locals that went to Camp Jocassee. One of them was Anna Simon. She's a reporter for the Greenville News now. She was a camper at Jocassee. She wasn't from Florida. So, you know, I've met several of the ladies. I believe they have their own little group, as they call themselves, on Facebook, and they communicate quite a bit with each other. But this is a photograph, and the photographer from this perspective is standing on the Whitewater Bridge over the Whitewater River, looking across the bank and taking a photograph of the front entrance of Camp Jocassee. That's the main driveway gate. The sign was over that. When the valley was deemed condemned and relocation was inevitable, they gave property to the camp to relocate on a peninsula on Lake Keowee below the Jocassee Dam. It operated there for about 3 years before they finally gave it up. So it didn't continue long after it left the valley. It just lost its attraction to its alumni and to the campers. It just didn't carry over very well. The sign was relocated, but the stone pillars were not. So basically what you see in this photograph is still there, minus the sign over the top of the driveway. So that's one image, and I'll show you, I'll get you to the underwater version shortly. Just wanted to share some of these things with you. This is a plat of Jocassee Valley that was pre-impoundment. This is something that Duke Power did to, when they were surveying the lake and trying to figure out, you know, whose land was where, what's going on. Okay, I'm going to kind of scroll down here so you can get a little better idea. That's most of it. So over here where I've got my mouse now, this is the location of the dam for Jocassee. And when you go up the river, this is the Toxaway River coming down. This is the Whitewater River. They converge just before you get to the dam. The two rivers converge right here. Okay? So when they flooded the valley, those two rivers are now joined by the lake. If you went up the Whitewater River, excuse me, here's the convergence right here. I missed it. This is a convergence. Whitewater and Toxaway join here. From this point down, it was called the Keowee River. If you came up the Whitewater River, you would come underneath the Whitewater Bridge, approximately right here. This is where the road crossed the lake, or crossed the river. Immediately make a left-hand turn. Girls' camp was just across the bridge. If you follow the river upstream about a mile, then you'll find the Atacula Lodge. This is the Atacula Lodge, sits up here. Okay. We were able to locate Camp Jocassee for girls because there's a big iron bridge that crosses the river, a very prominent electrical and reflection.
Is it still there? The bridge? Is the bridge still underwater?
Oh, yes. So the bridge is really what we went looking for. And a friend of mine purchased a very high quality side scan sonar system. He was going to retire and go treasure hunting. So while he was still living in Atlanta, he drug it up here and we played on the lake with his piece of equipment. And we got a good return. What we felt was the Whitewater Bridge, got the GPS coordinates. I went back a couple of days later with a camera, lowered it down from the surface and put my eyes on the bridge for the first time. And that was done remotely from the surface with my boat. So then I called a couple of friends of mine and said, hey, I got something for you guys to dive on. I was not qualified to do a 300-foot dive. I was only qualified to do about 160 feet on air. I had not progressed in my diving at that point. So Camp Jocassee, next to the Whitewater Bridge, my buddies came up next weekend and they dropped down and they tied a permanent rope to the bridge. And we've got it marked with a beer keg that's about 40 feet below the surface. So we go out to the numbers, send a diver down to the beer keg, clip onto that, and now we're anchored to the bridge. And that's how we dive when we go dive on that part of the lake. We're physically attached to the bridge. When you swim away from the bridge and you head towards the girls' camp gate, that first image that you saw there where the gate and the stone pillars were on each side, what you're going to see in the video is the approach to that front gate, okay, and the way we found it today, you know, and how it sits today. That's the Camp Jocassee. The Atacula Lodge sits about a mile up the river. It is a 2-story building made out of wood. It had an addition that was on the back of the hotel where they added on to what was a rather large farmhouse to turn it into a bed and breakfast. And they put this big addition, they called it the dining hall, and there were accommodations upstairs on this addition. Debbie Fletcher's grandparents ran this B&B, for lack of a better description. It was considered the Atacula Lodge. I know she came here a couple of months ago and did a presentation about, you know, her family and talked about the books that she'd written. Don't know how many people were here for that one. But when I met Debbie, I was researching the girls' camp, trying to find anybody with old photographs, anybody with first-hand information about the girls' camp, because we were trying to decide which direction to go to look for things. One of our limits is time. When we go to 300 feet to look and see what we can, we have 15 minutes. And then we spend the next 2 hours coming back to the surface. So for about a 2.5-hour dive, we are only actually exploring for about 15 minutes of that time frame. The rest of it is spent coming back safely. So the more information we could go down with, the more photographs we could look at ahead of time, the better we would understand what we were seeing. Because understand, you see this entire wall, you see this entire blueprint. We see about half of that screen when we're underwater. So we're looking for parts of a bigger picture, and the more photographs that we can look at, the better we understand what we're looking at and try to say, okay, I know where I'm at, I know what I'm looking at, okay, because you don't see the whole thing at one time. So we were researching that, met Anna Simon. She showed me a bunch of her old photographs from her days at the girls' camp, put me in touch with Debbie Fletcher, who was writing a book. I met Debbie. She provided this plat that you're looking at right now and asked if I would help by donating some time to take her and her family up to the location where the lodge was so that she could do a book dedication, tie a brick to it, and drop it. And I said, yeah, we can do that. So then I started talking to all my friends saying, okay, we can't just do that. We got to do a little more. Let's go look for it. So we did that. I took this plat to a surveyor along with other known points, which was the bridge. The Mount Carmel Cemetery is right here. This is the location of the old Mount Carmel Church on the one side of the road, and the cemetery was on this side. So I gave him these coordinates, and I said, so here's this point, here's this point, here's this point over here. Would you please triangulate and give me a place to start looking for this hotel? And that's when I went out and started looking once he gave me those coordinates. So again, from the surface with a camera, dropped down to 300 feet, watching a television monitor about 2 o'clock in the morning, because I had no glare, no boat traffic, no wind. I could just sit out there and float and move around methodically while I looked. And when I located it, then I marked that spot. We went back, and once again, I sent my friends down to look at it, tie in, and started researching this hotel, which was easy because Debbie has lots of pictures, and she could tell me everything firsthand, so that helped a lot. But what we couldn't understand is why the pictures that were coming back, because I would set my camera up and I would hand it to my friends and say, go take video, go take pictures. And they'd come back and they'd hand me the pictures and the video, and we'd start watching it, and I'm going, how are you holding the camera? This doesn't, it doesn't work. It's not fitting right. And they were telling me what they were looking at in their perspective, and I'm looking at this video going, it doesn't fit, it doesn't work, but I'm not down there. So how can I dispute what you tell me? So I then decided it was time that I got certified to do the 300-foot dives. So that winter, I spent that entire winter in training in Florida to become a technical trimix diver, which allowed me to do those kind of dives. And the first dive we made was the next summer. And my first view of Atacula Lodge and the girls' camp are the videos that you're going to see tonight. These are some of my older videos, the newer stuff. The newer camera has not been as cooperative as my old camera, let's just put it that way. I have not been as successful with that. So talking about it is one thing. I'll be glad to talk more. I want to show you some of the video. I'll start with the Camp Jocassee for girls. That's the flyer, excuse me, wrong video. Can we dim some lights maybe a little bit? It'll help a lot.
Well,
Okay. What you're looking at is what the divers see when they first come down. This beam was the most confusing thing about it. Now from that camera perspective, it makes sense. But this is what you see. Okay, I'm going to swing back, and now you see where we have a cable coming down, and that was a slate. Okay? Now this is part of the side of the building.
and this is Atacula Lodge?
This is Atacula Lodge.
Okay, this is Atacula.
Okay, yes. This is at 300 foot. Apologize, couldn't get the music to work. Okay, take note of this right here. And you'll see how I rotate the camera. This is the very front of the hotel. And it took us a while to figure out what was going on. But this image right here proved to my friends, my other dive buddies, that the hotel had actually floated and rolled over on her side.
Oh, really?
So now, when you look at it, this is what you see. I had the camera sideways for a moment. So when we were looking at video, things didn't make sense because everybody was holding the camera right side up. And things didn't fit. But if you notice all of that scalloped siding that was in the gable there, that was only in one place on the entire building. And if you notice, it was all sideways. So it took a while because all my buddies that were diving on this building a year before I was kept telling me they were swimming under the porch, the overhang of the porch. And they would swim around the hotel underneath the overhang of the porch and work their way, what they thought was on the back corner, around to the front where the steps were going up to the front. It turned out that the porch that they thought they were swimming under was actually the overhang of the roof because the building was on its side. Okay, so like I say, what you see here are bits and pieces, and you're trying to put this puzzle together while you're down there. This is a roof section. You see the cedar siding, cedar shingles, the old cedar roof. It was covered with tin. After the cedar shingles got to where they couldn't keep repair, they put a tin roof on the building. They repurposed a great deal of the Atacula Lodge when they were told they were going to flood this valley. So he started taking bits and pieces off of it and using it for other projects. This was one of the proofs that the building was on its side. That door to your left right there is horizontal, not vertical. So now, it's real obvious in this photograph or this video, but we were swimming around the bottom at ground level, and we never saw that door because it was in the middle of the building up over our heads 20 feet, and we were swimming around the bottom, looking for the front porch, looking for the front steps. Okay, now I've changed cameras. This is a different video. I've got a little better lighting now, so this is not a continuation of that. But what I want you to notice...
Where's all the fish?
No, not at 300 feet. Never seen a fish here. Okay, to the right, when you look inside of this window, that is beaded board ceiling. Okay, and it's a wall in this video because the building is on its side. Another one of those things that just kept confusing us. So if you rotate the camera, it makes sense. You go in the room, the ceiling has beaded board. Now here's a still shot. There's the door. There's that gable on its side, and you see all the scallop. There's that same gable vertical. Okay? Now we're going to jump. I'm going to hit pause for a second, if I can find pause. Here we go. Okay, that was the Atakula Lodge. Okay? Wooden structure, 300 feet of water. That is how we found it. Nothing has changed since we dove on it the first time, and I'm pretty darn sure that nothing's changed after about the first 10 years that it's spent underwater.
Were there any trees around it? Did you
Yes,
run
no,
into
there's
any?
trees. There are a lot of trees around it, but not right up next to the building. So
Because I
when
knew
we're
they
diving-
left all the trees there, I just.
When I was
didn't see
searching, when I was hanging that camera 300 feet from the surface below, looking for this thing in the middle of the night, I learned something, dragging this camera around, looking for something man-made. All I could do was put my boat in gear, get it to move, and pull the throttle back, because my camera cable would arch. So I'd have to bump the boat forward and then wait for the camera to swing back under the boat. Well, I got really smart after a couple of instances where I got it stuck in a tree. Because what I learned, when the camera got stuck on a tree limb and I moved the boat, the camera didn't go forward, the camera would zoom back. It would zoom back, it would pull away from the bottom. So as soon as I realized the camera was coming up, I'm like, okay, now the cable is stuck on something. So then I'd pull my camera up real quick, watching the monitor, I'd see it go over the tree limb, and then I'd let it back down right away, because I knew there were trees all around this
Right.
hotel. And I couldn't avoid trees, I just had to manage. And so I picked that camera up 3 or 4 times and dropped it back down, and then I'd bump the boat forward again. The first image that I found of a man-made something that night was a refrigerator laying on its back with no door on it. And you see these perfect 90-degree angles in this box. And I'm thinking, okay, that's man-made, I'm close. So, and then another time the camera started coming up, and I'm thinking, okay, I've got another tree, so I start pulling it up. And as I pulled it up, it crossed over that first beam, that first image that you saw when I was showing you the video. That's the first image I saw. The camera was actually stuck on part of the roof. And when I pulled it up and it started swinging forward again, I was looking at the hotel. So that's when I marked the spot, because I was right on top of it. The following Saturday, in order to put my divers, my buddies on it, we went back out, repeated the process, dropped the camera, and as soon as the building came into view, I just lowered the camera and watched it go right through one of the openings in the top of the building. And then I let out about 100 feet of cable, slack, and said, there, gear up. You're going to follow the camera to the hotel. And that's what they did. When they got down there, they pulled all that cable out of the inside of the building, picked up my camera, and started swimming around, showing us on the surface what they were doing down on the bottom. So we had a live feed on the very first dive on the hotel. I tell that story because it was 2004 that we found that building. We lost our tie-in this last winter. We went out to make our first dive on it this year, and our beer keg was gone. We couldn't dive. We had to scrub. We had 10 people on the boat to dive the hotel, and I had no way of taking them to it. Our mooring was gone. So we had to back up the next weekend, and I went out with my camera all over again and did the same thing. Lowered it down, put it on the building, lowered it into the building. I geared up, a couple of friends of mine and I, and we followed the camera cable down, made a new tie-in, and now we've got a brand new tie-in. So what I did many years ago, we just had to repeat it this last July in order to start diving it this season. Yeah.
How close can you get, I would imagine all this done with GPS coordinates and so on.
Yeah.
How close can you get using those coordinates? Are you within inches, feet?
No, I'm within 20
Yeah.
feet. When my GPS says I'm on the site, it really has more to do with which way the boat's facing. The front of the boat's 20 feet in front of the GPS receiver,
So you're right there.
so I'm right on it. It's just whichever way the boat's swinging as to which side of the boat the beer keg will be
Sure.
found on. But I can pull up and find the beer keg on my depth finder at 40 feet. And then I just have a diver drop in with a 30-foot line. He drops down, clips it onto the beer keg, and now we're tied to the beer keg, which is tied to the hotel. Okay? Same thing as on this bridge. So what you're looking at right here, this is the top of the Whitewater Bridge, adjacent to Camp Jocassee. Okay, this is the first deep dive location that we found. Just happens to be the second video in this thing. So what you're seeing here, images of the Whitewater Bridge, okay? And a quick tour of one of our dives. Okay, so this is the western end of the bridge, closest to the girls' camp. Okay, what you're seeing here are tie-ins. Now, on this day, I had several guests that paid for me to take them to the camp. A couple of them had scooters. This is the front entrance to Camp Jocassee. That white picket gate you saw the girls standing next to,
Oh,
this is the
wow.
stone pillar, and there is that
Picket
white
gate.
picket gate, just like you saw in that photograph. Nothing has changed. There's the big stone pillar, and you'll see the metal pipe coming out of the top of that pillar where the sign used to attach. That's 3 foot, about a 30-inch square pillar of rock. Okay? So that's the girls' camp. So now I'm going to swim back over to the bridge, and we skipped all the dull part, swimming through the silt. Okay? Now I'm back over at the bridge, and you're going to see a tie-in. Let's see, get that right. Okay, so what you're looking at here is part of the steel work. There's a diver. If you notice how he's not kicking his feet, he's responsible for the bad visibility today because he's got an underwater scooter. Him and his buddy came, they paid for me to take them here to dive, and they wanted to scooter the bridge. Well, everywhere they went, they trashed the visibility and made this big dust cloud from their propeller. But I managed to get away from them a couple of times and get some clear video. So this is the Whitewater Bridge. This is at 320 feet in Jocassee. And the girl that is my dive buddy on this dive to my right here, she's diving a rebreather. I dive open circuit, which means I carry scuba tanks. She carries a couple of tanks and she rebreathes the same breath over and over and filters the carbon dioxide and adds oxygen as she metabolizes. So she's diving a rebreather, I'm diving open circuit. I carry enough scuba tanks that I could take 6 recreational divers on a dive. And I have the same amount of equipment on me for one dive that 6 normal divers would carry, just for perspective. And you see the truss work of this bridge, the diagonal bracing and the steel beams. Okay? That's the guardrail brackets. Guardrail was removed. That's a jump line. So now I'm going from the upriver side of the bridge back to the downstream side, which is where we began the dive.
Is the flooring still
That-
on the bridge, or?
So that's still asphalt on the bridge, yes.
Is it really?
Now, that's where somebody bumped the bottom. You saw that crater?
Yeah.
That's where a diver came into contact with the bottom and, stirred up about 18 inches of silt. So you notice all the cables. There's a stainless steel cable that goes up to our beer keg, and there's a rope that was the initial rope that we never removed. So a rope and a cable go to that beer keg. So it is a night dive, but now you see the perspective of this video. You don't see the whole bridge. You only see little pieces, and all you can do is travel along and try to make sense of it. And that's the end of the dive on the bridge. Now we're headed up. So, and you can see now that the guys with the scooter have gone up. They ran out of air, and it had a chance to clear up. Now, on a different occasion, and everyone that dives with me knows that I'm the world's worst person when it comes to having a camera that cooperates when it needs to. Okay, so that's the video that I have that shows. Okay, so let's Camp Jocassee. So, nope, wrong picture.
Do the one
Jocassee, I want
that
Jocassee.
near Warner.
Okay.
That's the bridge, right?
Okay, that's the bridge that we were just looking at. So now when you look at that photograph, okay, so this is a picture from the girls' camp catalog showing the girls canoeing down the Whitewater River from the camp. And that is the bridge that crosses over that we were just diving on. So you can see how it was constructed, the horizontal and the diagonal bracing. It's called a Pony Truss Bridge, which meant it had no overhead support. You could take a tall logging truck across this truck over this bridge. There was no structure above the road. It was on each side, so the design is called a pony truss, and that's this style of bridge. And you can see the roadbed is about 5 feet above the bottom of the bridge. Okay? On one of my dives, had about 10 divers with some really phenomenal lights. They were all lined up on the bridge, lighting up a different part of the bridge. And I dropped down to the old riverbed below and was trying to get a nice silhouette shot to match this image. I was trying to capture this image from underwater. The camera didn't cooperate. It was spectacular. But the most amazing thing that I found on that dive wasn't the image I didn't get or looking up at the bridge, but when I looked down, you could tell that the silt on the bottom of the river, the old riverbed, was not as thick as everywhere else. The river current was keeping the silt from accumulating in the old river. It was still moving water and channeling water through that old channel. So I was amazed when I'm looking at rocks down there that should have been buried in the silt like everything else we see. You know, there's 18 inches of silt coming up that white gate on the bridge, at the entrance to the girls' camp. You know, probably 16 to 18 inches of just talcum powder silt. So that, how much is accumulated, it's burying the gate. You know, it's slow, but the river was different.
Still running.
The river's still moving to a great degree, and that was, you know, one of those epiphanies I had on that dive. So,
What year did they flood it?
it started in '69, it went to full pond in '72, okay? So there were phases where they started the construction, and they had the river diverted through a tunnel, through the mountain, and they were building the dam. And Duke had been studying this whole project and how they were going to do it, and they decided, okay, once we get the dam up to this elevation, we'll be okay. We'll be way ahead of the amount of water coming down, and we can seal off this bypass tunnel, and we can start letting the lake back up while we're still building the dam, while we're still building the intakes and the powerhouse. They decided to go ahead and seal off this bypass tunnel and let the lake start to fill. Well, it wasn't very long after that that we had one of those higher than normal rainfall periods that actually qualified for a tropical forest to the degree of rainfall that we had that year. And they got caught off guard, and they had to go into 24-hour shifts, and they were in double overtime trying to get the dam up high enough and get the intake structures completed so that they could move the water through the mountain again, you know, and they ran out of time. They had to shut the quarry down that's adjacent to the intakes and start quarrying rock from about a half a mile away from the dam site, you know, back up towards Salem. There's an old quarry there that they had to finish getting the rock to finish the dam because the lake covered where they were getting the rock, and they had to top off the dam from another quarry that was about a half a mile away. So, you know, they lost even more time having to truck the rock a little bit farther. So a lot was going on during that time frame.
And we do have construction photos in the museum of what Jocassee during construction and some of the views of the valley as well as Keowee. So there are some books in the museum at the Duke display.
Okay, and so let's go back to this one. Now that you've seen the video,
Amazing that gate's still there.
And that's the gate.
okay, that's the gate.
That's amazing that gate's still there.
So when you look at that little girl that's leaned up against the stone pillar there, okay, the silt is probably up to her calves. If you go back and compare that gate and the bracing that holds all the vertical pieces, the horizontal bracing that's right below her knee, that is in the silt, that first horizontal. So I've studied that picture a lot of times. The pillar to the right is still there also. I don't have that in that video.
That building that's to the left,
That
did y'all-
was removed.
It was removed?
Yeah, that one we know is removed. We found the foundation stones, and it is close enough to those pillars. See, when we were first diving it, we had been told that building was left, and that someone said they saw that building with water going up it. There was supposed to be somebody who saw it. So, but we have verified that that building was not left there. There are people that have come forward since then and said, no, we tore it down, we used the material to build this house, or that whatever. So, you know, once we learned more about it, we stopped looking for that. And about that same time, we found out about Atacula Lodge, so we went and started looking for that. And then, once we started diving Atacula, it was the big discussion as to, is it standing up? And I was arguing with these guys for a year, but I wasn't diving it. I was just looking at pictures and video they brought to me. So once I became a technical trimix diver, then I got to go down there and I'm going, okay, I know what's going on now, because I've built houses, and I know how you build a house and how this fits to that. And when I got down there, I'm going, this thing's on its side. And everybody wanted to argue for another year until that photograph of the gable, when you look at it upright and you see the little, what we call gingerbread siding. So that image proved that point. So, hang on, I got a little bit more. I'm running long here. I'm going to share this with you. This is a outdoor kitchen. So 40 years ago, when you had your garden and it was time to put all your garden away, you didn't want to crank up your oven in your house because there was no AC. So you were heating up everything and making it miserable indoors, so they had outdoor kitchens for canning. This is an outdoor kitchen. It sits directly behind the house that I purchased, where my dive shop is. And I just thought I had a really cool old building, and when I bought the property, I never did anything with it. That's how it looked when I got it. I left it alone. I store some gardening stuff in it. There's flower pots and stuff you see on the ground. It's just a really neat old building. It's got a chimney with a flue where they could have a little wood stove in there and do their summer canning. Last summer, I had a neighbor come to visit. His name is Lum Tally. Lum Tally came walking in and was chatting it up, having a grand time. Actually, he was wanting to know if I needed help mowing my grass. I was a little behind that week, and he was willing to come and cut my grass. Well, I was acknowledged that I didn't need my grass cut, but I was going to do it myself. But while he was standing there talking, he goes, man, he said, that old building's still standing. I said, yeah. I said, you know about that? He goes, yeah, I built that. I said, really? He says, yeah, I was a teenager.
I'm saying, you ain't that old.
I helped old CO, I helped so-and-so build this thing. I said, really? He goes, yeah. He said, we took all the material off that old Atacula Lodge, and we built that building with the old material from the Atacula Lodge. And I'm looking at this guy going, what? Are you telling me?
Cool.
I've got a piece of the Atacula Lodge in my backyard.
Wow.
And he's going, yeah. He said, that's off that old dining hall, that old back half of the building. He said that, and he's telling me every part of this building, where it came from. Because he took it apart and then put it back together in my backyard. Now, of course, that was for somebody else at the time. You know, I've been in this house since 97, no, 99. I bought this house in 99, and this little kitchen, it's about 100 feet out the back door. And I found out last year, now up until that point, Debbie Fletcher, and they've got her book here, we brought her a piece of the Atacula Lodge on the very first, I say we, the divers that know that I wasn't down there with them, but I told them, bring something back. And they brought this wooden panel, it's called a side light, and there was a panel on each side of the front door of the Atacula Lodge that had glass in it. Now the glass was broken, but the wooden panel was laying there, and one of the divers picked one up and brought it up. And Debbie just loves this thing, and it hangs like a Rembrandt in her living room on the wall, on hooks, and a little plaque and a photograph of the guys in the first dive that we did on it that day. So Debbie was just tickled to death that she had a piece of the Atacula Lodge. Now last year, Envy got her, because I had to send her this picture and say, look what I had. So,
I really have a piece of Atacula.
but what was funny, 9 years ago, I was taking my divers up to this building and pointing out the beaded ceiling in this building. This kitchen has beaded ceiling and the panels. I said, so when you look at this, you're going to see this beaded board, just like this. And I'm talking, this is my example, not even knowing this was the lodge or part of the lodge. So for 9 years, this was the example. This is the same kind of construction. This is the same kind of what you can expect And then I found out last year that it is part of the Atacula Lodge. 100% of this, other than the current floor that's in there, is part of the Atacula Lodge. So, and you know, for me to be the first one to find it and have the biggest piece in the county, so you know, it's like these guys that found this canoe, the rafters and the kayakers. They've seen that log for years. It just didn't click what it was until they started moving some sand out of the way and realized, hey, this is a canoe. Well, I'm the same way. I'm looking at this thing, not even thinking that this is actually a piece of this lodge. You know?
So did you ever consider tearing that down before you knew what it was?
No, but Debbie's asked me to improve it, make it a B&B for her. When she comes up, she wants to keep it. So that's my little outdoor kitchen. Okay, so shared that with you, that one. So let's go to this one. All right, so. This one does have sound, but it's not playing. You got the sound up now?
It should have this on the.
Oh, I got it too. I got it. There we go.
I say it should have been.
Okay, this is the Mount Carmel Cemetery. My son actually shot this video last September, a little over a year ago.
But now, some of the graves were relocated, correct?
Most of them.
But
were
these are the
relocated.
ones that did not want to get relocated.
Right. Now, that's the Hinkle. The big one they were just at. We're going to come back to it in the video. That was relocated, but because Duke Power was paying for everything, family said, hey, Grandpa needs a better headstone than the one he had. So they left the old one and they got him a new one when they relocated him and his wife.
And they're all relocated to Old
Can you turn the
Pickens.
volume down on
Oh, yeah. I think.
it? Can't hear you.
I got it. There we go.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. But, so the old Hinkle headstone was abandoned. They were relocated, but the stone was abandoned.
Okay.
When we first started diving on the cemetery, and you see it in the background there, it was laying down in the mud. I took a buddy of mine, actually the same guy that did the side scanning to find the Whitewater Bridge, he and I went down and took a large C-clamp and put it on the headstone, put a lift bag on it, picked the headstone up and set it back up on the space. A couple of years later, a diver inadvertently just kind of came and pushed off of it, just trying to, you know, got too close and kind of pushed back and tipped it off again into the mud. So the second time we picked it up and put it back, we put hydraulic cement under it, so it doesn't even wiggle now. So this is the big Hinkle headstone. It's been featured in several magazines. There's a book that was authored by a British gentleman who came to the United States, and he documented one underwater photograph from every state in the U.S. Now, this is a book, a coffee table book by a Brit, but he spent 3 years diving in the United States taking underwater images, and there's a picture from every state in this coffee table book. And this is the image that they used for South Carolina. This is the image that represents
What
South
is
Carolina.
that?
It's a Halloween skeleton. We call him George. Okay, all right, I'm gonna pause that real quick. Let me back up for just a second. All right, and get ready to pause it. Okay, so this is George. I just dropped him down there just so there would be something amusing for Halloween.
Oh, that's just
Okay.
creepy.
Okay, now, I'm gonna freeze it right there. The reason I'm stopping it there, this tree. How many of you are aware that the movie Deliverance was filmed on location in Oconee County?
Yeah.
The whitewater scenes were shot on the Chattooga River, and the end of the movie and part of the beginning of the movie was shot on location at Lake Jocassee during construction. The movie begins, you'll see images of them dynamiting the side of the mountain to gain the rock that covers the earthen dam. Jocassee is a dirt dam. It's 1,500 feet thick, almost 1/8 of a mile long, and 400 plus feet tall. Solid dirt, coated both sides with granite. That is what they were blasting on the side of the mountain, was the granite to cover all that dirt to control erosion. Okay? At the end of the movie, John Voight is kind of reflecting, and we'll put it that way, on the events that happened on the river at the end of the movie. And he's standing on the edge of the lake and where the road goes down into the water as the lake is creeping up the road. And he hears equipment. And he goes in towards the noise, walks through the woods a little ways, comes to a clearing, and there's a backhoe digging up coffins. and a group of men putting coffins on a flatbed truck. And they included this image in the movie. All they did was set up cameras and film what was really going on. Okay, so they were actually exhuming the cemetery, and they set up some cameras, put a few of the actors in there that, you know, needed to have a cameo appearance in the movie, and, you know, set the stage and showed the exhumation of the cemetery. Okay, this is that cemetery in the movie Deliverance, and the reason I paused it here is this tree on the right-hand side of the image here is some type of evergreen. It's not a cedar tree, and I don't know the type of tree it is, but it grows like a cedar tree, but the limbs are real tight together, and you see them around these old home places, and they're real skinny and real tall. Someone may know the kind of tree I'm talking about. This image, this tree, is very visible in that image in the movie Deliverance. So when you're looking at the cemetery, in the middle of the cemetery, you see this tree. That tree is the one that you see in the movie Deliverance. Okay? That's why I was telling you about that.
That'd be a cypress, wouldn't it?
It's not a cypress. I forget the name of the tree. When I hear it, yeah, that's it. But it's not a cedar tree, but the limbs grow straight up and real tight together. It looks like somebody wound that one up like you do a Christmas tree that you're going to take home, you know, so that the limbs don't get damaged between the tree farm and your house. But that is actually how the tree grows. Okay, so you can see this is one grave marker right here that is not adjacent to an open grave. Okay, we didn't stand that one up. It was already standing up. So we're pretty sure the occupant of that grave is still there. It has writing on it, it is not legible. What you're looking at here are open graves and the pile of dirt next to it where they exhumed a body.
So they didn't backfill.
Nope, they didn't. They weren't worried about it.
Makes sense.
So what you see here is a line of open graves where they were exhuming these bodies to be relocated.
Why haven't the remaining caskets floated to the surface?
Nope, they weren't in. They weren't put in the ground in the same method that we use today. Okay, now what you're seeing here are some body parts. Those are nothing more than mannequins, more of the Halloween stuff. Okay, so I don't know who caught the leg in the last image there, but that's what you saw there. There's also a metallic silver mannequin down there. It looks like an alien.
And the majority of those caskets were wood,
Wood and
and
completely
they've probably
deteriorated.
already disintegrated,
Yeah,
so there's
we-
nothing really to float.
Okay, now this image right here is one of the coolest things about diving the graveyard, other than it's a graveyard. This is what the bottom of Jocassee looks like. It is a standing forest of trees. Okay, when you dive the Mount Carmel Cemetery, it's a clearing on the top of a hill surrounded by trees. Okay, so that's what you see. Now that is only at 140 feet. My son shot that video, and a couple of my students were the people swimming in it. So that is what the Mount Carmel Cemetery looks like. Now that is, depending on the lake level, a recreational dive. You don't have to be a technical diver to do that one. Okay? So that's basically the images that I have for you this evening. If anything that I've shown you has stirred your imagination, I teach scuba diving.
So there's still like skeletons down there.
Yes.
Wow.
Well, when they were actually exhuming the cemetery, what they were doing was going to a location of a grave, and they would dig down until the dirt changed color. Then they would put all the different colored dirt in a new box and move it. That's really what they relocated, was the different colored dirt.
So they don't even know if they got bodies.
Well, they got something. They got down to that level.
Remains.
They got what was left. It's ashes to ashes, dirt to dirt. Okay, dust to dust. And that's real. Now, when you stick someone in modern times in the ground, they are preserved. You can dig them up to them.
Did they not move the monuments?
They did, a great deal of them, but there are,
That one was left behind.
well, no, there are several. The main one that we see in the video there is the Hinkle headstone. At the base of that family plot, just off to the side, you see the Whitmire stone laying there. That is not where it belongs. It's just that's where it got dropped and left behind. Then you go another 75 to 100 feet north, and you come to what we call Doris's headstone. It's a young lady who died 2 weeks before her second birthday. Her name is Doris Yvonne Hamilton. And in 1918 to 1920, sometime in that time frame, is when she lived. She was relocated. Her headstone was not. It was left behind for whatever reason, I don't know. And it's the dearest, darlingest thing. The headstone has a picture of a young, of a little girl kneeling down next to her bed saying her prayers. Okay, and at the bottom of the headstone it says, "I pray the Lord my soul to keep." So it's a really, really, moving
Seems
headstone.
like it'd be sort of dirty fool for them not to move the monuments, because they have.
Well, a lot was up to the people.
And it's a family, it wasn't Duke. Understand, this was the family.
Family
Family
decided to
made those
leave.
calls. So the family said, no, we want a new headstone. We want a bigger, better new one. Duke's paying for it, And that was their mindset,
Just leave it there.
And
And,
they left
and
the
that's
old
why
ones.
some burials are still there, because the family did not want to move.
And
and
that was a
relocate.
choice that was given to the family.
Yeah.
And family would say, this is their final resting place, we're not disturbing them.
Leave them.
And all Duke cared about was that there wasn't gonna be a coffin popping up. So they would go out there with a probe and make sure the ground density was strong enough that it would not pop something loose if there was an air pocket below. And that's all they cared about. And so those coffins or those grave sites weren't disturbed. But understand, those are the ones that may have only been marked by a rock, not a monument. It'd just be a rock for the head, a rock for the foot, chiseled out a little bit. We see rocks all along the hillside that look like they're lined up like graves. You don't know that that's what it is or not. And a lot of them weren't even maintained or marked. Somebody was buried there, but there's no indication where that spot was. And you can't really, we're talking about 1970, 72. We didn't have ground penetrating radar where they'd go out and say, okay, here's a burial site. That's not the kind of technology that existed. So if it wasn't marked, family didn't say, that's Aunt Georgia, we want Aunt Georgia moved, or there's Uncle Fred, we want Uncle Fred moved. If there wasn't someone from that church or that knew the family, that knew where that someone was planted, they weren't moved. So I've spent a great deal of time trying to find out if anyone has a drawing that says, here is where Whitmire was buried, here is where Doris was buried, here is where Hinkle was buried. Well, we know we got the Hinkle spot right because the headstone was sitting right beside its pedestal, and none of that had been broken up or moved. So we got that one right. But I've always wanted to put the Whitmire stone next to the empty hole where the Whitmires actually had been buried. I wanted to make sure Doris's stone was next to where she had actually been buried. I have not been able to get anyone that could tell me, and there was a record keeper, the guy that was in charge of this, that was part of the Mount Carmel Church, but he passed away. And no one has his files or can translate his files. So I kind of ran into some dead ends there because we were trying to put things back as near where they belonged, not necessarily where we found them, but as much as we could establish where they were at.
Not even county records?
No. No. Nothing like we have today, and even today, they'll go to, dig up a new spot to bury somebody, and they'll find that they're digging on top of a grave they didn't have on record. Okay, and they gotta move over 5 feet because somebody was buried here already, we gotta move over. And they don't even know who that person is. So, even in modern times, they make mistakes, and certainly, from the 1800s, this cemetery was an active cemetery. So there's a lot of unmarked. I've been told there was a section that was a slave section farther down in the woods. We've looked, we didn't see anything, you see rock here and there, but you can't say that this is that slave cemetery or whatever it is. I've got no one that can tell me other than hearsay. And so much of what I determined, that was hearsay, that, oh yes, this is, you'll find this was left, and we get there and it's gone. And then the one that we were told was floating around in the lake for weeks, we found sitting right where it was at, other than it just kind of floated and rolled over on its side. It had an internal chimney. The Atakula Lodge had an internal chimney on an internal wall, and it happened to be on the downstream side of the building. And my hypothesis, and until someone can tell me differently, that's the one we're going with. As the lake started filling, the hotel started lifting. And the side that was lifting was the side that the river was pushing on also. And it got to a certain point where it was leaning, the river's pushing on it, but the chimney was holding it. And it finally just fell over. The chimney held it there until it became saturated, waterlogged, so it didn't float around for weeks and then sink again somewhere else. That we now assume was the bowling alley that was adjacent to it. We don't know where that thing, they saw it floating for weeks and then it disappeared. So somewhere over near Devil's Fork is where that was last seen floating. And it was Debbie Fletcher's uncle who flew over with his aircraft and was looking to see what was going on as it was filling up, and they saw this structure and they thought it was Atakula. So when Debbie Fletcher asked me to take her book and drop it where it used to be, we said, well, let's go look. You know, nothing else, there was some steps, and there was a big set of rock steps that went from the road. You had the river, and the road ran right beside the river, then there was a bank, and then a hotel up here on top of the bank. So there was a big set of steps going up towards the hotel. We thought it'd be cool, drop down and put the book on the steps. Instead, I found the hotel, so we put it on what we thought. At the time, the guys that took the book down thought they were putting it on the front steps. It turned out they put it on the foundation for the chimney. Because when the building fell over, the rock pile they thought was the front steps turned out to be the foundation. So I said, well, we still did good. We got it on the hearth.
Yeah.
We didn't get it on the steps, we got it on the hearth.
There you go.
Any questions? Yeah.
I know Jocassee is your specialty, but do you know anything about the other lakes? What's under Keowee and
Keowee, we've got the Shallow Ford Bridge, which looks a lot like the Whitewater Bridge, and that's still intact. Crosses over Lake Keowee, just out of Fall Creek. So if you leave Fall Creek Landing and you drive out, currently it is not marked. I've got a brand new buoy that the state of South Carolina has given us to mark it. So we're going to be putting that marker on the Shallow Ford Bridge. So if you go out of Fall Creek and you just kind of look off to the left, there's a big rock where people jump off of. A couple hundred yards to the left of that, you're going to see a new white buoy with a blue square on it. That'll be marking the Shallow Ford Bridge once we get it marked. The Seneca Water Treatment Plant, we call it the pump house. It's where they pulled water from the Keowee, from the river or creeks, and made drinking water for the town of Seneca. When they decided that they were going to build Lake Keowee, they built a new water plant higher up on the hill and moved a great deal of the equipment to the new location. So we dive on the old water plant that was for the city of Seneca. That's a 3-story brick and mortar building. Covers an area that's more than a half acre underwater. The building, the downstairs, the ground level, lower level is about 80 feet deep, and the top of the building's at about 55 feet. The chimney's at about 55 feet, so you can drop down and dive on the old Seneca water plant. And off to each side of it are big tanks that remind me of swimming pools, just side by side by side by side. And they come out from the building and then they turn and there's another set of tanks. And this is just all stages of settling out the sediments and treating the water and making it drinkable.
Why did Duke decide to cut off access between the two lakes with the dam?
Oh, it's a hydro, it's a pump
Well,
hydro station, it's making power.
It's really elevation.
That's-
Okay, this is we live in a very mountainous terrain. So because of that, when you build this dam, it's going to flood to this level. Okay, and then up the valley, farther away, is where they built another dam, and they made Jocassee, which is about 400 feet higher up.
And then above that's Bad
And then,
Creek.
yeah, and Bad Creek's another 500 feet
Yeah,
on
but
Jocassee.
no, it's to make power, I
Yeah,
mean,
it's strictly, it's all about
hydraulic power,
kilowatts.
yeah.
It's all about kilowatts. Now, what's interesting is Lake Jocassee is the first pump storage facility in the United States. And by that, they actually will they will feed power to the turbines, turn them into pumps, and they will pump water from Keowee back into Jocassee up the hill. Now, there's a net loss. They lose power in the process of pumping water. But they do that when there's low demand for electricity. A nuclear plant runs best at 100%. A coal-fired plant works best at 100%. So they don't like to throttle them up and down and heat them up and cool them down to make power when they need it. They want them to run wide open all the time. So what they would do, and understand this is long before there was deregulation and Duke started selling power to California. Okay, at that time frame, you had your area and you provided power for this area. This was your monopoly. Okay, so Duke Power built these pump storage facilities, and when they were spinning the reactors and pumping all this electricity out, if they couldn't sell it to anybody, what do you do with it? Well, we're going to pump water, and we'll pump it uphill. And then when everyone turns on their ovens when they get home from church and start firing up their roast, okay, and the power meter starts spinning, we'll dump some of that water out of the lake and make that demand. So it became a battery. Best description is just a giant battery of electricity waiting for them to open it up, spin the turbine, and make electricity. So it works two ways. Bad Creek is above that, same type of design. It is a demand pump storage facility. Now, Bad Creek does not offer any public access for recreational use because it's such a small lake and it's basically a giant funnel. So because of its design, it's not safe to have it open to the public for recreational purposes. Now, the benefit that we got in Oconee County, because you have to give and take as far as these regulatory commissions go, and to take up all of this natural resource and make a electric plant, what are you going to give the people? So we got Devil's Fork State Park, and we got a lot of other improvements on Lake Keowee. But Devil's Fork State Park was actually built as part of the permitting process so that they can condemn and lock up all this resource for Bad Creek. So to make up for that public loss, they gave us a state park.
At one time, they quit it now, at one time, Bad Creek allowed DNR and the Trout Association Club to take youth up on the river, up into the parking lot and up on the river.
Well, you can still do that. No, you can still.
Up
you
into
can
Mustard
still-
Ground,
You can still
yeah.
go, you can go down into Bad Creek,
Sure.
park, and walk down to the Whitewater River and fish
Absolutely.
tomorrow morning. Now that hunting season is open, they've even got the gate, and you can drive
Drive
farther back
way
into
back
mustard
up in
ground,
there.
way back into mustard ground, as long as you got a four-wheel drive vehicle, because they don't do a lot of improvement on that road. But if you've got a four-wheel drive vehicle, you can access all the way into the mustard ground during hunting season.
The old logging roads are
Yeah.
totally accessible.
So they give and they take. They take first and then they give back. And so actually we just got a whole new reface of the local area. They're relicensing, and Duke is kind of like, well, we want to spruce things up a bit. So they made a lot of improvements on some of the ramps on Keowee and put glorified outhouses and changing rooms at the ramps, and improved and redid the concrete, added some new docks. You know, they made some improvements. All of that was part of relicensing, giving back to the community. So every 15 years, we're gonna get a facelift, I guess.
And you can see Bad Creek from Highway 11.
You can,
That's a beautiful sight.
That big
that
white
big white,
thing,
Yeah,
that's the west dam of, that is the west dam of Bad Creek.
Your recreational dives.
yes.
So you go to the cemetery. I've seen footage online and so on. Divers, you have to be certified? Do you-
Oh, yeah, no. As far as what I do, I run a dive shop at Lake Jocassee. It started off as a weekend business where I would furnish air fills for the diving community and boat rides out onto the lake to the parts that you couldn't get to without a boat. So that's how my business began. Then someone convinced me I should teach. So then when I started teaching, I had to have equipment for my students to purchase, so now I ended up owning a retail store. Never my plan. It just happened. You know, if you told me 15 years ago I'd be doing this, I'd be looking at you going, oh, you know, well, 20 years ago. About 15 years ago is when I began it. So I would have never believed you if you told me how my future was going to be reshaped. But recreational diving is to a limit of 130 foot deep. Okay? So there are 3 phases to get to 130 feet as a recreational diver. And the definition of a recreational diver is someone who can make an immediate ascent to the surface without having to make a stop. Okay? Once you pass that time underwater, you have to stop and come up in increments. The more time, the deeper you begin, and the longer the increments are. Once you pass that description, you are no longer a recreational scuba diver. You are a technical scuba diver. So that's the difference. And because Mount Carmel Cemetery right now is at 140 feet when the lake is full, it's a technical dive. It is deeper than the limit for recreational diving. If we have a drought and the lake's down 25 feet, it's an advanced dive. It's a recreational, but it's an advanced open water dive. So that's the reason I make that statement, depending on lake level, as to what your qualification needs to be. But everyone has to be a certified diver, yes. It's not something that you can do what we call a discover scuba and go around and swim with brim and look around at the fish in 20 feet of water. I can do that with anybody, you know, that can watch a video and answer 10
That's about
questions.
as far as I got back in the 60s when I was a kid. I took
Right,
lessons in the pool, went out to Lake Michigan,
played
and
around.
30 feet was about my limit.
Right, okay, so that was probably a little more than a discover scuba. But, you know, in terms of recreational diving, teaching open water divers, you start off, you're certified to 60 feet. You can become an advanced open water diver. You're qualified to 100, and with experience down to a depth of a maximum of 130 feet. You can start at age 10, and my oldest student to date was 92.
So back in my day, we had the old
Yeah,
regulators.
dual hose, yeah. It's a lot easier now. You don't have to do somersaults to clear your loop.
Yeah, I remember that. We had to take our gear out of the bag at the bottom of the pool.
Put it together,
Yep.
yep, then go home and service it because it was full of water.
Right.
So it's a different, it's a different world as far as divers go now.
I can see
It is a recreational community, okay? The type of diving that I do is fewer than 0.1% of certified divers are qualified to do a 300-foot dive.
Wow.
It is not a large community.
I can't even imagine.
It's, and like I say, the amount of equipment, when I gear up to do a 300-foot dive, I could take 6 recreational scuba divers and take them out diving with the same equipment. Okay? I have that many bottles on me, that many regulators, and I'm just stacked up.
Say, how big are the bottles now? What are they like?
80 cubic feet, and my bottom mix are 120 cubic foot bottles. I have over 1,000 cubic feet of air when I go down, of different types. So that's how much I expect to be able to use and come back with 1/3 of it still in the tank. I always have a 1/3 rule. So when my dive is done, there's at least 1/3 of the air in all of the tanks that I started with. So Murphy is a scuba diver, and what will go wrong, can go wrong, will happen at the most inopportune time at the very end of the dive when you need the air the most and you have the least to deal with it. So because of Murphy, I overkill.
So that's place will not be issues.
So anybody wants to learn to scuba dive, I'll be glad to teach you how. So I don't see any 92-year-olds, so no one's too old in this room to begin. You have to be able to swim 200 feet nonstop, any stroke, not just American crawl, but you can do a backstroke, side stroke, breaststroke,
And
dog
tread,
paddle,
and tread for 10 minutes?
and tread for 10 minutes. Keep yourself on the surface for 10 minutes without
I float
drowning.
very slow. Me,
So-
like this.
You can just lay back and float.
I can just
If you're that
float.
individual, I'm not that individual, I sink like a rock.
Very slow.
Actually, I don't sink completely. I think there's like 3 inches on the top of my head that stays on the
Yeah,
surface.
that was Barry. He didn't sink completely, but plunged. Me, I just,
I taught little kids how to float on their back, but I couldn't demonstrate it. So, it was a pleasure having you come out.
Yeah, thank you very much.